want to talk today about a paint that I'm sure most of you have got on your palette, and quite a few people have a bit of a love-hate relationship with, and it's Payne's Grey. And most people tend to use it as a dark, or a lot of students anyway, but I don't really think that's how it should be used. I'll grab a little scrap of paper and I'll show you roughly what I'm thinking. So if I pick up some basically neat paint, do a quick outline of a tree. So bring up a tree trunk and drag on a little bit of foliage. And I see a lot of people will paint tree trunks in that way, pretty much neat Payne's Grey, and for me it doesn't look quite right. Now I think Payne's Grey is at its best when it's diluted, quite a lot really. So if I drag some of that paint in, you can see how light that is, and it's very cool blue grey, and it makes for a really nice element in a sky. If I pick up a little bit of blue and lay that next to it, I think they're quite complementary next to each other. It's just a little bit of cobalt blue. If I touch a tiny little bit of light red in there as well, I think that combination of colours, especially in like a cool winter sky, or if you want some atmospheric clouds, looks really great. But Payne's Grey on its own, when laid in for the tree there, and it's dried a little bit already, and it goes very chalky. Okay, moving on, I'll do a quick demonstration based on this sketch that I made in Morstan Key in Norfolk back in the summer, and it's a good example of what I'm talking about. So I used Payne's Grey in the sky, but every other dark that you can see, so the posts on the quay side and the boat masts, I mixed those. So I mixed my own darks for those, and they remain slightly transparent and they look just more lively. They've got more energy about them. So I'll start with some blue. It's a bit of French ultramarine, a little bit of cobalt. Drag some of that into the sky. And now I'll touch around the edges with some clean water. Drag that around a bit. I'll run through this demo quite quickly if I can. Just want to make the point really of how Payne's Grey is best used. Now, like I said before, a lot of people tend to use it as a dark, and for me it doesn't really work. So I pick up some neat Payne's Grey and I've touched in lots of water to that, and I can drop a tiniest little bit of raw sienna in with it as well. And I'll lay that in around that blue. And it's created a really nice cloud grey colour. So pretty much neat paint now, quite dilute. Touch a little bit of blue into it as well. I can start dragging that in. And now for me, anyway, this is where Payne's Grey is best used, and it's in a sky and it's very soft, heavily diluted. And I think by its nature, because it's made up of 3 pigments generally, or traditionally anyway, I think it would have been something along the lines of Prussian blue and Scarlet Lake, I think, and maybe yellow ochre. The formulation can vary quite a bit these days, and I think some of them are as simple as just ultramarine and burnt sienna. But anyway, because it's made up of more than one pigment, it doesn't really mix very well when it's kept as a dark. It dries very chalky. But when dilute like this and allowed to run and allowed to mix with everything else, I think it makes for a very pleasing sort of stormy cloud, or a rain cloud colour especially. Now I've picked up some raw sienna, mix that in with a little bit of the grey in the palette there, and I can drop that in and around. And I think this combination of colours with Payne's Grey works really well. Can touch a tiny little bit of light red in there now as well. And that's mixed with some of the dilute Payne's grey. And I can drag some of that around. And now bring that sky all the way down to the horizon with some clean water. Bring that down quite low and grab a little bit more of that blue that's sitting there in the palette and reflect some of the blue from the sky down into what will be the water area. Leave a couple of little white areas behind as well for some light. Can bring that all the way across the land. I'll cover that up in a moment. That's basically the first wash finished, so I'll dry that completely now. Okay, it's fully dry, and really like the colour that's formed with the Payne's grey, the way it's mixed with everything else, and the way it sits next to the blue and next to the raw sienna in the sky. It's a really nice colour combination. And so I'll add some distance in, and I'll put some posts in for the quayside. But I won't use any Payne's grey for any of that. I'll mix all my own darks. So I'll start with some distance. Pretty much as always, starting with the most distant area first in the land and then working my way forward. So it's a little church on the horizon there. And I'm really just using the blues that's left behind from the sky. I can drag that across from side to side, allowing it to get very dilute out towards the edges, and then I'll touch the bottom across that with some clean water. Don't want any hard edges forming towards the bottom of that distance. Now I've got some raw sienna, very dilute again, a little bit of burnt sienna as well, or burnt umber I should say. And now I'll outline the edge of the creek. I'll try and work through this quite quickly really. Touch a little bit of the blue into there as well. A little bit of burnt sienna. Now bring that bank all the way down to the bottom of the sheet. You can touch some of that colour into the land at the top there as well. I'll move on to the right hand side bank. And now there's the top of the marsh there, and that comes down to another muddy bank where it meets the water. So I'll touch a little bit of blue into that. Let's drop a tiny little bit of potter's pink in there as well. Actually, it might granulate, might make a nice little effect. The colours I'm using really for the land, not overly important. So I'm going to lay the land in pretty quickly. I want to get to the point where I lay the posts in and then mix my own darks, and then hopefully you'll see the difference between using Payne's grey as a dark and then mixing your own darks. And so keeping Payne's grey pretty much exclusively for clouds really. That's pretty much all I use it for. And lay a little bit of green there. I've just mixed that up with some cadmium yellow and a tiny little bit of blue. Touch some texture into that land there, into the middle ground. Okay, I think before the wash completely dries, I will mix a little bit of dark paint. So my go-to mixture for darks is a blue and a brown. So I've got some burnt sienna and some French ultramarine. And so I've mixed that quite dark, and I can lay that in around the edge of the creek, just where the banks meet the water line. Now this wash is quite wet, so that's diffusing and softening off. Really getting a little bit of texture in there before it dries. Touch some of that dark in below the marsh area there. And now it's essentially a dark, and it's not overly important of the colour, it's more about the tone and the value. But if I'd used the Payne's grey for this, it would have mixed with what was on the paper and it would have dried very chalky. Okay, I need to get some posts in there, but I'll dry it quickly first. Okay, I'll mix up some more dark paint, so some French ultramarine and burnt umber this time. A little bit of cobalt blue in there. And I've dried the brush off. And so working on that key side, cutting around the area of the marsh there and dragging that across, getting some little bits of dry brush as well. And now I can put some posts in. So very quickly, and then using that dark paint, just add 3 or 4 and a couple of little posts there. And now the joy of mixing your own darks is that you can vary the mixture. You've got more control over it. So I can put some slightly lighter posts in by making the mixture leaning towards the brown. A few more little posts on the left hand side there, well, quite large posts actually, to be honest. I think they're probably about 10 or 12 foot. And lay a couple in behind that marsh area as well. I'll switch back to the smaller brush. I can put a few little boat shapes in. And some very simple little masts. But again, using dark that I've mixed myself. So I can vary that mixture. I can go into a little bit of blue. And as I mentioned quite often on this channel, variation in your colour and your tone is really quite important. So if I use the Payne's grey for the dark element in this painting, I'm kind of stuck as well, even though I don't like the way it dries. Now maybe you do, and that's fine. If you like it, then do stick with it. I'm not telling you that you're wrong by any stretch. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't be that arrogant really to say that. I'm just trying to highlight what I prefer and do my best really to try and tell you why. And so just put some Payne's grey in there now. And for me, that's too kind of monotone. It's too kind of one single colour there. And I could only really go darker with it. So blot that out and pick up a little bit of burnt sienna, French ultramarine. And for me, as a dark, it's far more pleasing. It dries transparent. So I can touch a few more little dark areas across the marsh and across the land. A couple of little posts there. Drag a little bit of texture down in the foreground. A few little shadows across the bottom of the marsh there as well. Now I know I keep mentioning it, but if I'd used Payne's Grey for these dark areas as well, when they dry, they do kind of dry it in a quite an unpleasing chalky way. Let's put some reflections in as well, and I'll lay those in quite dark. But again, I'm using a mixture of blue and brown to achieve the darks. And now the real benefit of that is that I can always modulate the dark as I go. So I've added some blue into there and a little bit of the raw sienna that's left sitting there in the palette. And so every time I go back near enough, I'll just put something else in to change the colour ever so slightly. Now working my way around the palette as well, I'm picking up little bits of blue, little bits of grey, little bits of brown, and mixing it all together. Now, although all these reflections are very similar colour, there is a difference. There is a tiniest little bit of variation, and that makes for a more interesting painting. So very simply bring down a few more reflections. I'll reflect that mask there down in the water. I'm not sure that would have actually made it there, but in the interests of this demo, that's good enough. Now I can grab some more blue, a bit more burnt umber, get some real strong punchy dark in across the bottom of the creek. Can drag some of that in, a little bit of dry brush texture across the edge of the water. And again, a little bit more texture at the bottom there in the foreground. Some simple little posts. And I think we're pretty much finished. I'm just fiddling around now. Drag a little bit of darker blue across the water. Break up some of those reflection shapes really, and it helps to accentuate the light on the water as well. Gives it a little bit of a sparkle. Okay, I won't fiddle around anymore. I'll call this one finished, I think. Okay, that's the demo done. I hope you can see the difference there. By really diluting the Payne's Grey, you get quite a nice pleasing cloud colour. It kind of looks like a rain cloud off in the distance, but then by putting in all the darks, by mixing my own darks with a little bit of blue, a little bit of brown, and it forms a far more pleasing dark colour that I can modulate myself, and I can play around with it. I can make it bluer or browner, lighter or darker, far more easier than if I just used the Payne's Grey for that. But anyway, simple little demo. I hope you like that. Let me know down in the comments what you think, how you use Payne's Grey. It's always interesting to hear. And do check me out on Patreon if you haven't already, and subscribe to my channel. It's a big help. If you could do that, that'd be great. And anyway, I'll be back again. So have a great week, everyone, and thanks a lot for watching.